Okay, hi everyone. This is Yvonne Brady speaking. Hi there, I see myself on the big screen now. Welcome to this, our 10th Children in Care Research Forum. Really pleased to have made it to 10, and we're delighted to have Dr. Dawn Mannay from Cardiff University to speak here this morning to yourselves. I'll just run through a few housekeeping points, if that's okay, before we start. So first of all, it's a big thanks to Maeve from the Trinity Research in Social Sciences group for helping us with technical support for today. We would be quite lost without her, so thanks so much, May, for your help. Just to note that some of you might have registered for a previous session that we had planned with Dr. Lavinia McLean from the Technological University in Dublin. We're hoping to reschedule that session when possible, and we'll be in touch once we have that planned. Just a few notes about these sessions generally. So we have a master mailing list that we circulate information about the various events through. And if anyone wants to be added to that list, you can email me at bradye3@tcd.ie. Please don't put your email address into the Q&A box here today because it'll get lost. I won't be able to capture it, but please do email me. bradye3@tcd.ie is the address. Anyone who is on Twitter, please feel free to use our hashtag Children in Care Research if you're tweeting throughout the session. And then lastly, just to let you know, the recording of the event will be circulated to everyone who registered afterwards, and we'll also be sending on the slides for the session as well. Dawn has kindly agreed to circulate those. And thanks to May for putting my email address into the chat box there for everybody. So you can email me at that address if you'd like to be added to the mailing list. So what we'll do is I'm going to introduce Dawn now in a moment. Any questions that you have, we'll hold until the end of the presentation, but please feel free to type them into the Q&A box down there in the bottom middle of your screen, and we'll get to as many of them as we can after Dawn's presentation. So without further ado, I'll introduce Dawn, Dr. Dawn Mannay from Cardiff University, as I said, who's very kindly zooming in from Wales. She's by the beach, so I'm very jealous, sounds lovely. And she's going to talk to us today about research she has done around the value of cultural and creative engagement for young people in foster care. So I will hand you over to Dawn. Thanks, Dawn.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, there we go. So thank you very much for inviting me. Oh, sorry about this. I'll get it working. So good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me today. So as Yvonne said, my name's Dawn Mannay and I work in Cardiff University in Wales. So diolch, which is thank you in Welsh, to Robbie and to Yvonne for inviting me. I was really pleased to come over virtually to Ireland from Wales. It would be very nice to come in the non-virtual world, and I hope to visit Ireland again. But it's very nice to be here with you virtually today. So Robbie and Yvonne asked me to talk about a paper that's come out recently in qualitative social work about a project I was involved with. If anybody can't access this paper and they'd like a preprint version, please do feel free to email me and I'll send you a copy over. So this presentation really thinks about the importance of culture and art for children and young people who are care experienced, which Robbie has been talking about, since the 1990s. So we know it's important. And Piran's done a review thinking about all the different benefits that children and young people get from engaging with the arts. And lots of studies have been done, but they don't always ask young people themselves. Sometimes they'll just ask foster carers, or sometimes carers will be excluded. Sometimes you don't get the voices of facilitators. So in this study, we wanted to try and talk to everybody and get an idea of their different subjective views on this programme. And we were also interested in all the little mundane but important things. So we weren't just interested in the influence of the arts, but we were interested in, what are the rooms like? What do people get to eat? What are the relational qualities? So we really focused on those things. So this was a project with the Fostering Network in Wales and Wales Millennium Centre. And I was involved based on earlier work that I'd done looking at the experiences of education for care experienced children and young people in Wales, and what they thought should change and be different. So because of that, I'd worked with the Fostering Network before, and we'd been in this sort of 3-year conversation with Wales Millennium Centre, trying to do something with young people. Because in this project, we'd had lots of sort of arts-based days, and we did things like wall climbing and bag making and T-shirt making and clay work and jewellery making. So we knew that being involved with the arts was a real benefit. So after different tries to get some funding to do this work, we were able to do this as part of the Confidence in Care programme. So it was a 10 weeks arts programme, and we worked with 8 care experienced young people. So as part of the study, we did a review of the impact of arts and culture on communities more widely and looked at the benefits and barriers. And then we looked at different studies and projects that had gone before with children and young people. And then in the study itself, we did ethnographic participant observations. So me and Phil, who's not here today, went to all the sessions and joined in with everything in all the sessions. The young people got an arts award as part of the programme, so they kept reflexive diaries, which we were able to then use as part of the project analysis. We did a focus group with foster carers part way through the programme, and we also did a focus group at the end of the programme with the art facilitators. And then we also did interviews with foster carers and young people at the end of the programme. So this was I was really pleased to give this talk today because it was such a lovely project and everybody involved really enjoyed being part of it. So we started off, every session we start off sort of doing lots of drama games and jumping on chairs and being different animals, and we did some drawing. We got someone from Only Men Allowed to come and do some singing with us. We worked with different theatre groups. So there were lots of arts experiences. And then we also worked with the team that put on Warhorse. So we had a session with them learning how to move small puppets and making puppets. And then at the end of the programme, we all went to watch Warhorse together and all went out for food. So that was the sort of setup of the project. So young people, that's some of the stick puppets they made, and I'll come back to that later, but you can just about see the fish. That's my amazing fish that I was very proud of. The young people did much better puppets with moving joints, but I was still happy with my fish on a stick, which my grandchildren later broke, so I don't have it anymore. So we did things like that. At the end of every day, we'd have a sort of circle session where we all had a chat about what we liked, and then young people would note that in their diaries. So you can see sort of examples here, someone saying, if you focus on something you want to do, and then in the end you'll do it, and how some things look easy, but they're quite hard when you get to do them. So they just made notes about how they felt about the different sessions. When I got asked to be involved in this project, I did have some initial sort of cynicism that it would make any difference at all. Excuse me. So I thought sort of 10 weeks, is that, what's going to happen in 10 weeks? 10 weeks of coming together won't be long enough. And I wasn't expecting that much of a change. But there was such a difference in the young people. So they grew in confidence and different skills. They built friendships, and you could just see how real change in them from the first initial sessions to the end of the program. Foster carers also reported seeing changes in the young people, and a point that hasn't really been picked up in previous research, they built their own supportive networks. So it was important for foster carers as well. And the staff noted changes in young people, but also in their own ideas about what arts are and what arts can do. So the young people talked about the arts themselves. They talked about what they made and bringing their puppets to life and learning to sing and learning to perform and have an imagination. But they also talked a lot about the social aspect, about making friends, about negotiating conflict, about improving confidence, about having something that got them out of bed on a Saturday and got them more engaged. So lots of skills were built in here and lots of social connections. Foster carers also talked about their motivations for bringing young people and this sort of social aspect, wanting them to build friendships, wanting them to improve confidence. So a lot of foster carers said, yeah, there's education and educational benefits, but it's the social benefits that they really wanted, those friendships to build, that social interaction. And foster carers really found it supportive for each other. So one here is saying, it's nice to hear the stories and ask what I should do because I've been awake all night. So because foster carers had their own concerns, they felt like they had other foster carers who would understand those concerns. So a lot of the foster carers built friendships as well. This, I really like this quote from one of the facilitators that I think really captures some of the changes in the young people. So they're sort of saying they were like sea creatures. They had these crustaceans stuck on them and a mussel, and they were walking really slowly and you can't see where they were going. And there were all these muddy colors. And then week by week, this stuff sort of fell away and everything got easier, and you could see the young people as themselves. You could see their natural colors, and you could see the beauty and the shining and the brightness. And I really like this sort of analogy because that's very much what it felt like for us, that you really saw this journey through the program. And here at the end of this quote, one of the facilitators said, it's almost like they're breaking free. They're becoming the person that they really want to be. So I think one of the reasons that the program worked well, which a lot of the foster carers said, was because people felt at home. They felt they could make connections. So here one of the foster carers saying, they do other activities, but they haven't made any friends there. And it's more difficult because they're having to give a different account of themselves to other children. So here, everybody was care experienced. So it was different from just going to a club. So it was built particularly for care experienced young people. So a lot of people foster carers felt this worked better for the young people. They felt that they didn't have to sort of say, what does your mum do? What does your dad do? Or have a different explanation to the rest of the young people. And that's been picked up in earlier research, and we found that earlier in workshops that we've done, that they like to go into a space where they didn't have to think about what they said to other people. And the caveat there, though, was that when you do make a space like that, it can close down opportunities for foster siblings. So in this program, there was also a child that came who lived in the same household because they didn't want to be excluded. And if they were excluded, it would have meant the other child couldn't come. So there are tensions in that model. The spaces were safe spaces as well. There was a lot of routine and familiarity. We all met in the same space downstairs and had a chat before it started. We started the sessions with similar activities. There were a core base of staff that were there every week. Initially, foster carers joined in the preliminary activities. So for the first couple of weeks, the foster carers would stay for most of the session. Then they'd just stay for the warm-up. So they gradually left. And young people said that they felt more comfortable with the foster carers starting with them and then sort of gradually leaving, but still being in the building. Also, we had very skilled art facilitators. We had experienced practitioners from the fostering network. And we had researchers with experience of working with young people. And at some points, there were sort of 8 young people and 8 adults, and sometimes 8 and 6. So there was a lot of support to do the activities, and everybody joined in. So there wasn't sort of, oh, young people, you do this. We were all jumping on the chairs and rolling on the floor and doing drama. So everybody got involved. And that collaborative aspect was really important. So people talked about, you do these fun activities, you socialize, you make friends. We're in one big family. That's what I think it is. And you really got that family feel. So at the beginning of the 10 weeks, I remember thinking, I don't think this is going to be very good, and I don't want to give my Saturdays up. And by the end of the program, we didn't want it to finish because it had that family feel had grown. And Thompson's talked before about these spaces of belonging with the arts. And it wasn't hierarchical. So we weren't making schooled subjects. It was very relaxed. So at the beginning, one of the young people just played with their phone. They didn't want to get involved. But that wasn't sort of policed. It wasn't like, no, you're going to do this drama activity. We just let people join in as they wanted to. So I think as well, because it became more like a family, there were some tensions at the beginning. So one of the foster carers here is saying there was one child that disrupted the group. But as it moved on and people felt more connected, allowances were made in the way you would for family members. So, they were sort of brought into the fold. It wasn't as it had started. Everyone sort of worked together in these projects. Another sort of little thing that I wanted to think about was food. So often when you read project reports and papers, they don't talk about these sort of more mundane aspects, but they're important aspects. So there were lots of issues around food and provision of food, and there were changes made in the type of food. So it started with pizzas and lots of snacks, and foster carers were concerned that didn't take into account that some of young people had difficult relationships with food because of previous experiences. Young people really didn't ask for any changes in the programme, but the one big change that was in lots of diaries said, we want pizza back. So here's someone saying, that was the best thing. We had Domino's. If you go somewhere and they say, here's an orange, we're not impressed. Say we're going to have pizza. It's good, isn't it? Give us some pizza. It was the foster carer's fault. Who wants something more healthy? So you had these tensions, but you also had discussions from young people about learning more about self-control around food because they had the foods they liked. And when they first got there, they wanted to just eat everything, but then they learned to regulate their own behaviour. So I think with these sort of programs, there are discussions to have before it starts, discussions with foster carers, but also discussions with young people to think about who should choose, what the food should be, who decides, and to have this sort of more balanced interaction so everyone feeds in to food provision. The other thing about the programme was that it ended, and this is what we've had in previous programmes. I mean, when we've done research days that have been arts-based, we've had children come back as long as they can, but when funding goes and programmes end, what happens then? What happens to those relationships that have been built up? So here when the facilitator saying, it's the aftercare, it makes me nervous. We've and now everyone disappears. At the end of this programme, we did have some meetups. So I normally do the foster walk every year with the fostering network. So we all met up to do the foster walk together. The facilitators did these extension sessions because they were worried about this sudden end. It was a springboard for friendships, so some of the young people stayed in touch outside of the programme. I think 3 of the young people, I think it's 2 or 3, went on to do a main programme that's hosted by the centre. So they joined the main drama group, and they later did a play of Matilda when one of them was Miss Honey. So they stayed with it. So they had that introduction in that safe space, but they stayed with the Millennium Centre and got involved in their drama. And I've stayed on the advisory board, as have the fostering network. So we're still feeding into what the centre does. So for some young people, it was an end, but for some young people, there were these additional opportunities. So beyond this project, there are still sort of wider barriers to overcome. So for some, there's in Wales at the moment, there's a big push to have more arts curriculum in school. But for children and young people who don't have a good relationship with school or who are changing schools, they may not engage the same as the literature around sports. So because it's in school, that's a different setting. Accessing after school activities can also be difficult. Sometimes children live quite a distance from a school if they've gone into foster care but want to stay in the same school. So they can't always go to things that are on then. There are costs and fees attached. So obviously all this was for free. But sometimes arts and drama can be very expensive when it's privately run. The awareness of care status can be a barrier for young people joining programs, which was why it was good with this program that people joined as an initial group and then springboarded onto other things. There's also a heavy reliance on engaged foster carers. So to come to this program, young people needed to be taken, but not just taken and dropped off. So here the foster carers engaged in lots of the activities. They supported children to come, they encouraged children to come. So that's more difficult for young people who might have different situations where they haven't got an engaged adult who wants to do this on their weekends. I think for the bigger picture as well, you'd need significant investment from governments, the third sector, and individual arts-based organisations to make things accessible and not with a cost, so that you can have these ongoing opportunities rather than lots of little projects. So often you can get funding for a short-term project, but what you need is funding for something that continues to run. But in this project, with sort of careful planning and resourcing, there was a potential for young people to become more confident in being themselves. And I think that's the thing we really took away from that programme, that growth in confidence. And this breaking free from the difficulties that often characterise their wider school experiences. So that's just some references. So diolch Conrado, and I think it's time for questions. So I'll stop sharing and thank you very much.
Thanks, Dawn, so much. And I think your stickfish was excellent for what it's worth. Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And I think kind of maybe quite a different presentation than we've had on here. I think it's really interesting to think about arts and cultural activities generally in the context of COVID as well and how much they've been impacted. So thank you so much for that. Just to say to everyone, if you'd like to pop any questions you have into the Q&A box, please feel free to do so and we will work through them. I had a question, if it's okay, Dawn, just to kick off. You mentioned engaged foster carers, and I was wondering, the young people who and children who were involved in it, do you know, did they have kind of pre-existing interests or involvement in arts activities already, or was it kind of a really new thing for a lot of them?
One of the young people was going to do drama GCSE, so they had an interest in drama, and I think there was another person that did. The others didn't so much. But they had. When I talk about sort of engaged foster carers, a lot of the foster carers were on different forums or they were connected in a different way. Yeah. So a lot of the foster carers that signed up, I'd seen them at other events. So, so they were the ones that took up the opportunities. Okay, so not so much because the young people had an interest in arts initially, but because they're always looking for opportunities for their
Mm-hmm.
children.
No, it's lovely. It's really interesting. It's such a cool program. Is there plans to run it again, do you know? Or was that very much a one-off?
No, so they did, as part of Confidence in Care then, from the feedback from the first one, they did it in different areas of Wales. And
Okay.
now the Wales Millennium Centre is doing lots of programmes to engage children and young people more widely, but particularly marginalised groups. So, for example, the Millennium Centre have got a choir with Voices from Care. So they have a
Okay.
choir that runs there, and they do events, and they're
Mm,
also doing a radio program. So now they're really, really trying to think about how the organisation can change and do more things in the actual centre, but
mm,
also how they might need to go and do more satellite things locally so people don't
mm,
have to travel in. So,
mm.
yeah, so it's worked well because the centre are very committed to making a change, and they're good at partnership working with Voices from Care Cymru and the Foster Network in Wales.
And were the local authorities involved in any way, done, or was it very much a separate exercise?
No, I think invitations went out because it, to a lot more children, but it wasn't with the local authority. It's totally separate.
Okay,
But
okay,
the Welsh government did fund were part funders, I think with the National Lottery for the bigger Confidence in Care programme. So
okay.
that had quite a large funding and lots of different organisations. So this was just a tiny bit of that much bigger project.
Okay, okay, interesting. Okay, well, because it's kind of like a case study of an initiative. Like it could be anything in many ways, and there's lots of lessons to pull out from it. I think in that respect. For question, Maeve has a question about the point you made about the pizzas. Yeah, which is so interesting. She's wondering, did the participants express an interest in having more self-determination in other aspects of their lives, and do you think that this aspect of the program helped make it so successful?
Um, do you mean in terms of the young person saying that they thought they had more self control?
I guess so. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that was interesting. I think it was sort of only maybe one young person that said that yeah, when they had pizza and cakes and all the bad foods that the first couple of weeks they were like, I've got to eat it. And then they just said they learned to regulate their own eating, which I thought was really interesting
Mm,
because the foster carers were not happy. They were not with the food. So, they were sort of saying, what are you doing? And I mean, it's a hard one because when I do stuff with children and young people, I get pizza, to be honest, because they don't want carrot sticks and stuff. And they'd be like, what are you
what?
doing? Yeah, what are you doing? And it's sort of that balance, I suppose, because it's not every day when it's an event.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
trying to think, what do we go with? Is it supposed to be young people led? And do we go with what the young people want? Or, should we? So it's a really tricky one to
Mm,
negotiate. But
mm.
it's hard. And I think we have, and sometimes we like a treat, don't we? We like to have things that, like, I like to eat more chocolate than is good for me
I know.
sometimes.
Yeah,
So
same here.
there
Same here.
are celebratory, but yeah, I mean, the food was changed, but I think it's got to be a mixture, hasn't it? It's
Yeah,
got to be a balance. But I think young people need to think that their voices are heard if you're asking them,
sure.
particularly to plan going forward, and then they don't want to see a program where nothing that they suggested is there. So you've
Yeah,
got to
yeah.
have that ownership.
I wonder as well because the foster carers were at this program and were very involved, and in other initiatives or interventions or any kind of an event, they might be less involved and less. It might be less visible, less kind of confronting, I suppose, in terms of the food.
Yeah, because they could see it, and they
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, it was it was more of an issue. I mean, yeah, I think it was nice that the foster carers were so involved. I've just done still sort of doing another project now with the fostering network, which we've done online. And this was about how young people think research should be done and how they want to be asked questions and
Okay.
um, like what visual things they would like doing as a part of that. Should we do it creatively? So we were going to do it face to face with children and young people in workshops, but because of COVID, we couldn't. So that sort of
Okay,
put the
yeah.
brakes on it. So we had to do it online. And because we had to do it online and we sent lots of packs of craft stuffs out and different questions, foster carers had to support it. And we weren't going to have foster carers in. But foster carers really loved it. And they said that we should do this every time a new child starts with them,
Hmm.
because they said they found out lots of things about the children that they didn't know, and the children found out a lot about them. So because they weren't
Okay.
excluded, in a way, it was better. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's fab. That's a great example of how it kind of can shape and impact the experience of being in care and things, isn't it? That's brilliant,
Mhm.
John. Robbie has his hand up, and then we've a question that I'll come to then after that. Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks, Ivan. Thanks, Don. Really interesting presentation.
Thank you.
One of the things that struck me about, I mean, many things I could ask about, but one thing in particular was the point about the group. The series was for young people in care alone. Although I know you mentioned that maybe one young person from the same foster family was also involved,
Mm.
but overall it was for young people in care. I have to say, sometimes personally, I am a little anxious when things are too much isolating young people in care. And but I thought I was very convinced by the case you were making, that this was a very valuable bridge for young people.
Mm.
It would be a very tough ask. I think what your research has kind of reminded me is it's a big ask for a lot of young people to go to make one leap from not being involved in something like this to being involved in something like this with lots of young people uh, who are different, so different to them in the sense maybe they're the majority are not in care and so on. So I think it was interesting what you said, that for some of them it seemed to serve as a bridge where they could then continue involvement in the arts world,
Mm.
but probably couldn't have done that without the stepping stone of the project, which is really, I think, a great vindication of the whole project. You know, that this has kind of opened new opportunities for young people. And so maybe you want to make some comment on that. Sorry, before I go on to the next.
Yeah, I think there's a real tension. So when we were reviewing the literature, so you've got one set of authors saying, right, you need to do something. It's got to only be for care experienced people, no other people. They have to have their own space. And then a whole other literature saying that's more stigmatizing. You have to have open spaces. You shouldn't separate young people off. So I'd read sort of both sides of that. But I think, I mean, the project we've been involved with much earlier in 2015, lots of children were saying they want to come back because they like being in an arena where they're not the odd one out. So the younger children said that, and then the older young people we work with, sort of post 16, would say, I've only come because I want to be with other people like me, and I also want to make connections with them in my local area. So in those projects, there were the real sort of benefits. But yeah, I do think it's got to be a springboard. I mean, you don't want to just have this group that's set up forever and, you stay in this group. So you don't want to have these sort of camps. But I think for getting people involved initially, it builds that confidence to go on further, particularly if they can take someone from the initial group, which is what they did here. So they didn't go alone. They went together. A bit like sometimes, I mean, I did my degree as a mature student, so I didn't do A levels or, I didn't go to university when I was younger. But a lot of the adult learning programs start very small. And then when you do go to the big university, you're going with some other people that you've seen their face
Yeah,
before.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Such an important insight. I think this idea of having kind of bridges to new experience. Yeah, really great idea. But also being aware of that risk of stigma and isolation, that people get trapped in a bubble of with people who have similar identities to their own.
Yeah.
Which isn't really how life works mostly. So
Yeah.
Could I just ask a more practical question as well, while I have the floor, which is any advice you'd offer to both researchers but also practitioners in terms of engagement with this kind of project? Because I mean, it seems like it has so much potential for opening up opportunities, not just for the young people, but for carers, and also I think even for arts facilitators, it must be quite stimulating. I think it for everyone, it must kind of freshen up the way they think about a lot of things.
Yeah, the arts facilitators found it really valuable. What they did say, though, which was changed for later programs with this one, because obviously I can send people a paper, but it doesn't go into everything. They said that they would have, they wish they had the training first, because they had some training from for working with, care experienced children, young people, things that they'd need to know. But they said where the training came in was too late, because they would have designed some of the activities differently. So I think you've got to really think in advance about what you're doing. They also said that only the key facilitator were trained, where it would have been useful for everybody to have that training. So I think it's planning in advance and having training, but also having ideas from young people from who've done previous projects about how they'd like it to run. So having those experts by experience, foster carers, care leavers, to really think about how programs should go ahead before you sort of jump in. And also try and think, if you're doing creative things, because I use them a lot in other projects anyway, but trying them on yourself, with your friends and family, not just turning up. I've turned up before to something with fuzzy felts, and I forgot that you've got to pop everyone out. They just come in these strips. So I'm just thinking, I'll open the box and we'll do this. And it took like 2 hours. And the young people were like, we're not doing it now. It's like, shove your fuzzy felts. So you've just got to try stuff before you do it.
Yeah.
Important takeaway there, Dawn.
Yeah.
The fuzzy felt first.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thanks, Robbie. Actually, a question that's come in, I think, is quite connected to what you've been asking there, Robbie, but Dawn, you might have additional insights on what you've just said. Daniel Kill saying, thanks for the presentation. What approach do you recommend when trying to encourage young people to engage with creative therapy services when they are very resistant? So, if any thoughts on that one, Dawn?
Yeah, sometimes it's hard because of the way it's presented. I think if it's presented as a therapy, it has a particular connotation, doesn't it? And sometimes you can be stuck if you're working in a program that's called a particular thing, that can act as a barrier.
Yeah.
But I don't know the program, so I don't know the capacity, but sometimes if you can do something else first, so you could just sort of meet the young person and go to Costa Coffee, or you could, maybe it's the relationship building to bring them into the program, or to think about how some young people might want to do it with a friend, and is it possible for them to come as a pair with a friend, or is it possible for them to come with a foster sibling or a carer? So is there a way that'll help that young person engage? But then, will the program allow that? And I think that's the issue with lots of programs. There are lots of rules or regulations, but if they can be sort of swerved in a way that you don't run it in that normal way, but it's done with some sort of support.
It's kind of like the springboard analogy that you're using, maybe sort of a way of gradually easing someone into something, as opposed to, I know there's that can be tricky depending on, I'm not sure what the service is, Daniel, that you're asking about, but even talking to someone else who's been through it. But I think the general sense is that, like, any ways that make the initial experience of it kind of softer would be preferable if possible. But I think it's very relevant to the question you're asking there, Robbie, too, because I think your presentation has really highlighted the value, and quite beyond kind of, the fun and the activity, but things around, confidence and self-esteem and that sense of belonging and having that space. That's so powerful in what you've just been presenting there. So anything that can kind of help people to get into that space is obviously going to be really beneficial. Did you say what age the young people were, done? Sorry, I meant to ask you that. Were they teenagers mostly, or was it younger
They were
kids?
I think maybe the youngest was around 11, so it was that sort of early teenage stage. Yeah,
because I guess what you do to get people involved is different depending on, if they're 5 or 6 or 15 or 16. It's going to be
and there was a whole gender issue, because they all identified as girls, so there were no one who identifies as a boy.
Interesting.
And I think that's to do with gender stereotypes around the arts.
Mm.
So it's seen as girls' things.
Mm.
So I think if we'd have maybe done something like, based around rap music. So it's also thinking about how do you engage those other young people. And I think it's really difficult in academia because there's a criticism, that you shouldn't sort of say girls things or boys things, or you should, things have got to be open, but children don't think that.
Mm-hmm.
So even in the recent project I was talking about, when we've been posting these things out and we've saying to children, what should we do? How should researchers work? What activities? They clearly demark by gender, and they'll say, we want more boys things, or this won't work for boys. So it's very difficult to have those tensions because they have their clear ideas about what's appropriate for them in terms of their gender identity.
Yeah. And if you try to push back against it too much, then it just leads to no one potentially being involved, I suppose.
Yeah, and if you're trying to do it like in the new project, if you're trying to do it so it's led by young people, where'd you go with, they're either leading it or they're not. So it's difficult.
Do you plan to follow up with the group and to see if anyone has kind of stayed on in any kind of arts-based activity, or is that possible with the work?
Yeah, well, I know the two did because they joined the main drama, and some of them we'll see again. I think because some of the foster carers are involved in some of the groups. So yeah, and you just you see people all the time. I think Wales is quite small, so the community is quite small. So it's really nice. I see people that I worked with in 2015, and we've got somebody now that I did. I trained them in research methods, and then I interviewed them as part of another project, and now they're a co-researcher on a project with us.
That's so cool.
And you see people all the time. You go out and someone shouts "Dr. Dawn" like across the room. So you see a lot of young people who have started in smaller projects and have built that in some way, sometimes into further education or employment, or they're involved in conferences, or they're involved in a choir, or so you do see a lot of, you don't see everyone, and that's one of the issues with care is when people get moved. So we did one project and we wanted to send everybody a present, but then some of the addresses already didn't work.
Yeah.
So that's a real difficulty.
You, just to say for everyone that like you've alluded to already, but you do really creative things with your research, Dawn. You're like so ahead of the curve in what you do, and really kind of incredible ways of engaging children and young people, I think. And this is just, I suppose, one example of that. I have a question here, and then I think Robbie has his hand up as well. So Sam saying, I'm sorry, someone, Kate had to leave to go and collect her children, so she has left early. She sends her apologies. Sam saying, thank you, I'll be reading your article ASAP. Can I ask, do you feel that your findings would hold for other groups, for example, non-arts based activities, or is there something special about the creative aspect? Cool question, Sam.
Yeah, someone asked that actually when I was when I wrote the article, because the article sort of come much later than the project. But I do think that it would work with other groups, but in different ways. So I think there's something about the arts when you're drawing or creating things that does sort of shift your mind in a way. So I think there is something special to the arts, but I think you can get that feeling of a big family through other things like sport. So I did a study before, and I think I studied a boys' football team. And you do get these elements through sport. So I think it's not exactly the same as the arts, and I think the arts bring other things, but I think that you can make sort of, I don't want to say huge life-changing, because that sounds really dramatic, but you can make small changes that change lives through things like football as well.
And I suppose having that mindset for all activities, I guess it depends on the child, the kid, the young person as well. Something might spark, sport might spark someone, and arts might spark another person, and kind of having the opportunities, I suppose, to find that place where you're kind of finding your space or your thing, or the place where you feel a bit more like you belong, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's what it is. It's about the fostering of belonging. That you've still, I mean, the football team that I worked with, that was ages ago when I did my undergrad dissertation, they a lot of them are still in contact now, and it was really interesting because it was a football team that bridged an area of extreme poverty was bordering a very affluent area. So you had these very different children playing football together. But lots are still in contact now. So when I worked with them, they were just transitioning to high school. So they were 11. So I was looking at the fallacy of school choice and who went where. But the actual football itself, for some young people, a mate who had challenging circumstances, was a thing that gave them a sense of identity and belonging.
That is an intense undergraduate dissertation, Dawn. No wonder you're Dr. Dawn. I love it. That sounds so cool. Robbie, did you want to come back in?
Well, just thinking about your project, and it's really interesting how, as a researcher, you're kind of bringing ideas into the systems. Yourself. You're kind of not just a passive observer. You're kind of helping stimulate people's thinking and practices and so on, which is great. But on that point, and the mention of foster carers, and you were saying that, if I understood correctly, that it was almost like a accidental involvement of the foster carers, but maybe I haven't quite understood that properly.
On this study, it was purposeful. But on the one that I'm doing at the moment, it was by accident, but it worked out better. So that was serendipitous.
But I'm just wondering, I mean, this is speculation, I suppose, asking you to speculate in some ways, but do you think there would be any mileage in thinking about projects that this is ultimately to benefit children, but that if there was some attempts to engage adults in some of this work in order that they then are more connected in and more understanding of the point of arts as a way into opening up opportunities for people and breaking free in different ways. I think that was a lovely phrase, really, that phrase, breaking free, and how do we help people to break free, whatever it is they're breaking free from, but the different constraints and so on that operate in our lives. So I just any reflections on that about or alternatively doing it in a very structured way, so you're trying to bring a lot of carers with you into the process with the young people. Sorry, I'm jumbling that up a little bit, but anyway.
I think it definitely works for adults, and I think the foster care, and a lot of my work, because when people see me in work and I've got sandboxes and I'm going out with all this equipment, they always think I'm working with children, but most of my work has actually been with adults, with the arts. And in that project now, foster carers have absolutely lived it, and they like it because if you say, like, asking someone questions, which is always happens in care, social workers, you've just got this thing where someone's staring at you and asking you questions, and it's really uncomfortable. But if you're making things together, you're both looking at the thing that's being made, so it shifts that dynamic. So they're really, really useful. And that's what we try and sort of move away from the social work interview in our works. I think it builds a different sort of relationship. And I think but for adults in general and for care leavers, I mean, there's some great work. So like Sarah Jane, just like they do retreats for care leavers where they do artwork, and that's been really transformational. So there's lots of work with adults. It's really useful.
Very good. Thanks very much, John.
Okay.
Are there any plans to replicate this program elsewhere, or to do it again? Or
I know Confidence in Care have been doing other programs, and I know the centre would like to do more things. But yeah, I think there was a lot of input in that. So it's always about the question of funding to do that. So there was high levels of staff and high levels of interaction.
Yeah.
But I think that the centres, they've got I mean, it's been unfortunate because we've had sort of COVID come in the middle of it, but they've got lots of plans to engage different types of young people, because places like the Millennium Centre and art centres in general, they've done a lot of free provision activities, but you get the usual suspects of more affluent parents that take those up. Yeah. So it's about how do you engage other young people, and how does the centre have to change to do that, rather than the people have to change to come.
I'm actually just thinking, sorry, this is off the top of my head, 2 points. I wonder if there's people here who attending who might actually be involved in any kind of creative programs like this. It would be great to hear from them. But also I wonder kind of the arts, I'm kind of thinking about my own child specifically here, but I wonder, are there certain activities that kids or young people are more drawn to or less drawn to? Is the arts a trickier one to get people into as opposed to sports? And I'm thinking, almost answering that question as I ask, that it probably just depends on the child. It probably doesn't sway, a majority doesn't go either way. Does that make any sense even?
Yeah, I think you've got to just try different things when you're with different young people. And that's why it's hard, because often like policymakers, or they want you to come up with like, this is the thing that works, but it's never going to be, this is the thing that works for everybody. And you can ask 5 young people and get 5 different answers, which is hard when you're trying to do things that young people led. So then you're asking people, but they all want to do it differently. And it's how you cope then with that difference in a program.
Yeah, that probably goes back to Sam's question, I suppose, about, and I suppose it's about the building blocks of the program are things to think about elsewhere, but the activities and things like that will differ, but maybe there's elements of this that can be thought about and applied in other contexts with other programs and things like that. It's really exciting though to think about. Is the paper done? I'm just thinking, a few people said they'd like to access it. It's not open access though? Sure, it's not.
No, but I can send I could send it to you if you want, if that's easier than people emailing me.
That would be great. Yeah. So when we send the recording, we'll send the recording, the slides, and the paper. Then is that okay, Dawn? With you? Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah. The thing I think Robbie was saying earlier as well about it not just being research. I think that visual methods are useful there. So from our other work around education, and we try not just to do an article or a report. We've done magazines for foster carers, 2 magazines, like take a break, just like that sort of like those sort of magazines. So we've incorporated findings into those. We've done a young person's magazine for young people, and music videos and audios and short animations. So I think you can't, well, I expect, because Robbie will know as well, because he's been doing this, since the 90s and maybe earlier. But you get it's the same issues. Like all the studies bring up the same issues, but and sometimes you'll get changes in policy, but you won't get changes in practice. And it's because we keep writing articles and books that, just no one reads. So I think there's a huge potential in the arts to get messages out in all these different ways.
To all the people who need to hear them. Work from them. Yeah, that's such an important point. Amanda has said she has to leave, but very informative and innovative. It's so important to help these young people forge connections with others with similar experiences. I think that speaks to that earlier point about maybe the discussion about that as well, I suppose, that Robbie was raising as well.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Amanda.
There aren't any other questions, and I think maybe if people want to, if there's any last questions before we wrap up, I'm just looking at the time, it's 25 past, but just to say a huge thanks, Dawn, for, I think this is the first foray of this study to be presented, so we're really delighted that you were able to do that here today. And I think there's some really powerful messages that, specific to the program, but wider messages as well to take forward. And thank you for giving your time, the slides and the paper. It's very, very generous of you, very generous indeed. And I guess your email address is on the slides as well, if anyone does want to follow up with additional questions. Is that okay?
Yeah. So I know it's been quite quiet today, but hopefully if you have a question later today or in 4 months' time, and you think I can help with anything, or you want me to send anything, do feel free to email me at any point.
Thanks so much, Dawn. That's brilliant. And Dan saying thank you very much. That's brilliant. Well, I think we'll end it there, if that's okay. And Dawn, we'll be in touch. And thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for coming along. Just to add, we won't have any more sessions now over the summer, but we're planning to run more of these fora in the autumn. So we will be in touch with anyone who's on our mailing list. And again, the mailing list is bradyE3@tcd.ie if you want to be added to that. Okay.
Thank you.
So thanks so much, Dawn. Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.